some common features or characteristics. It is known as classification of cost. So classification means the process of grouping the cost according to some common characteristics. The cost can be classified on the various basis, or there are different methods of cost classification. The three important methods of cost classification are according to elements, according to functions, and according to behavior. When cost is classified according to elements, there are three types of costs, that is material cost, labor cost, and expenses. When cost is classified according to functions, there are three types of cost: production cost, administration cost, and selling and distribution cost. When cost is classified according to behavior, there are three types of cost. The first one is fixed cost, variable cost, semi-variable or semi-fixed cost. So the cost classification may be shown by a chart also. We can show the cost classification by a chart also. See the chart here. First, cost is classified according to elements. There are three important costs: material cost, labor cost, and expenses. Again, these three are divided into direct and indirect. So, material may be direct material or indirect material cost. Labor cost may also be direct labor cost or indirect labor cost, and expenses may also be direct expenses or indirect expenses. And all indirect expenses are called as overheads. Therefore, it may be indirect material, indirect labor, or indirect expenses. The aggregate of all indirect expenses, indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses, the combination of these three items are called as overheads. And again, overheads are classified into four types. Number one is production overhead, number two administration overhead, number three selling overhead, and number four distribution overhead. Let us know the meaning of various types of costs. We shall study meaning and examples of these types of cost. First of all, we have to know what is material. The cost of commodities supplied in crude form or in raw form for an industry is called material cost. So, material cost is the cost of commodities supplied to an undertaking in the crude form or raw form. For example, timber in furniture, clay in bricks, etc. Next, material cost may be divided into direct or indirect material cost. What is direct material cost? Those material cost which can be directly identified with a cost unit, then it is called direct material cost. For example, timber in furniture, leather in shoes, clay in bricks. Clay in bricks ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ಟಂಗಿ ತಯಾರಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಳಸಲಾದ ಮಣ್ಣು ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಕ್ಲಾತ್ ಇನ್ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್, ಬಟ್ಟೆ ತಯಾರಿರುವಂತಹ ಸಿದ್ಧ ಉಡುಪುಗಳಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ಬಟ್ಟೆ ಅದು ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, what is indirect material? Those material cost which cannot be conveniently identified with cost unit, it is called indirect material cost. For example, nails used in furniture ತಯಾರಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಳಸಲಾದ ಸ್ಕ್ರೂಗಳು, ಥ್ರೆಡ್ ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ಸ್ಟಿಚಿಂಗ್ ಗಾರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್, ಉಡುಪುಗಳ ತಯಾರಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಳಸಲಾದ ದಾರ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, ಲೂಬ್ರಿಕೇಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಯಿಲ್, ಯಂತ್ರಗಳು ಸರಾಗವಾಗಿ ಬಳಸುವ ಚಾಲನಾ ಎಣ್ಣೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, ಗಮ್, nuts and bolts, etc. These are the examples for indirect material cost. Next, what is labor cost? The amount of wages, salaries, bonus, commission, etc. paid to an employees of undertaking are called as labor cost. Again, labor cost may be divided into direct labor cost and indirect labor cost. What is direct labor cost? The remuneration or wages paid to workers who are directly engaged in converting raw materials into finished goods, it is called direct wages. For example, tailor, that means remuneration paid to tailor in stitching the garment is direct wages. Next, shoemaker, the remuneration paid to a person who is directly engaged in preparing shoes is called as direct wages, like carpenter, weaver, etc. These are the examples of direct labor cost. Then, what is indirect labor? The amount or remuneration or wages paid to the workers who are not directly engaged in converting raw materials into finished goods, but who assist or help in the production process, it is known as indirect labor cost. For example, watchman, inspector, cleaner, peon, clerk, etc. Next, what are expenses? Any cost incurred other than material and labor, it is called expenses. And again, expenses may be direct expense or indirect expense. Direct expenses are those expenses which can be specifically incurred in connection with a cost unit. These are the expenses which incurred specifically in connection with a cost unit. For example, carriage inward, freight, custom duty, import duty, dock charges, royalty paid to the landlord, etc. These are the direct expenses. And what are my indirect expenses? Indirect expenses are those expenses which cannot be directly identified with a particular job. For example, rent and rates, power and lighting, carriage, insurance, advertising, etc. Next, what do we mean by overheads? Overheads are the indirect expenses. All indirect expenses are called as overheads. Therefore, the aggregate of indirect material, indirect labor and indirect expenses are called overheads. Overheads may be of three types: factory overhead or production overhead, administration overhead, selling overhead and distribution overhead. Production overhead. All indirect expenses incurred in the factory premises in connection with conversion of raw materials into finished goods, It is called production cost or factory cost or works cost. For example, indirect labor, factory rent and rates, consumable stores, indirect materials such as cotton waste, soaps, nuts and bolts, lubricating oils, supervisor salary, etc. Next, what is by administration overhead? Administration overhead includes all expenses incurred in the direction and control and administration of an undertaking. So, all expenses incurred in connection with direction, control, administration, etc. of an undertaking, it is called administration cost. Therefore, salaries to the office staff or managing director or manager or accountants, etc. Then director fees, bank charges, postage and stationery, depreciation on office building and office equipments, printing charges, light charges, audit fees, etc. All these are administration costs. Then what is selling overhead or selling cost? The all expenses incurred for sales and stimulating demand and for securing orders are known as selling cost. So, the expenses incurred for sales and stimulating demand and securing orders is known as selling cost. For example, salaries and commission of salesman, showroom expenses, samples and free gifts, traveling expenses of salesman, commission to agents or distributors, advertising and publicity expenses, expenses incurred for printing catalogs, price lists, etc., exhibition charges, marketing expenses, etc. All these are related to selling expenses. Next, what are distribution costs? Distribution cost is an expense incurred in connection with the distribution of goods. So, all expenses incurred for distribution of goods are called as distribution overhead. Therefore, the examples of distribution overhead are packing costs, carriage outward, warehousing costs, loading charges, dispatch expenses, transport charges, etc. All these are examples of distribution costs. And another type of classification, when cost is classified according to behavior, there are three types of costs: fixed cost, variable cost, and semi-fixed or semi-variable cost. Those costs which remain unchanged with the increase or decrease in the volume or level of activity, then it is called fixed cost. Therefore, fixed cost is the cost which remains unchanged with the increase or decrease in the volume of output. For example, rent and rates of building, salary of works manager, depreciation of office building, depreciation of building, insurance, etc. And what is variable cost? Those costs which vary or change directly with the volume of output. When the volume of output increases, this cost also proportionately increases, and when the volume of output decreases, this cost also decreases proportionately. Therefore, those costs change in in direct proportion with the volume of work, then it is called variable cost. For example, direct material, direct wages or labor, or direct expenses, power expenses, etc. Next, what are semi-variable or semi-fixed costs? These are the costs which are partly fixed and partly variable. So, they are affected partly in the fluctuations in the level of activity. That means fluctuations means increase or decrease in the level of activity. These are partly affected. That means they are partly fixed and partly variable. For example, salary of supervisors, maintenance and repairs, telephone expenses, etc. Next, in the next class, we will study what is cost sheet, what are the advantages or objectives of cost sheet, and also we shall know